This is a special guest today because Kathleen is a longtime friend of Mac. So I'm going to let Mac kind of like tell you guys how he knows her. And then from there, we'll kind of get going in the podcast and learn more about Kathleen. So Mac, how do you know Kathleen?
Too many different ways. Originally, actually, Kathleen and I became really close, like going into high school, middle school. I went to summer camp, as you knew, and you guys know. I spent a lot of time with my white friends. This is how we refer to my friends from the county. I met all these Kirkwood and Mary Queen of Peace kids from summer camp. And whenever I got back to U City, I would just spend my weekends out in Kirkwood. And Kathleen and her group of girlfriends were friends that we like overlapped with and then like basically spent all of our time with. When I was talking about staying up till 4 a.m. on AOL, I was talking to Kat. I was talking to Kit456 Kat, okay? And we started dating in middle school, high school, right?
Yes.
And then, dating, whatever that is, talking on AOL.
On the phone and on AOL.
Then stayed friends throughout high school. And then again, after college, kind of stopped. We only talked on college. We only talked throughout college when we went back home, right? Like on winter break and stuff like that. We would all party. And then we actually reconnected after college whenever I got back from Mizzou. And we dated into me getting sober. At that point in time, you did Teach for America.
Yes. And then I was at the Brown School of Social Work.
Right, and then you were at Brown School of Social Work. And I would probably know a whole lot more about the things that I want to talk about if I had not been a complete active addict and alcoholic throughout the entire time that Kat was at Brown School of Social Work, because she was like banging out like all this like painstakingly difficult work. And little did she realize that she would have a client in her house at all times with her.
Full case study.
Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it. And then after I got sober, we reconnected, and now she is one of the absolute most important people in my entire life.
Oh, thank you.
One thing that he mentioned was the schooling process to become what you do now. So when he was saying that, I thought to myself, I don't really even know like the process of becoming a licensed clinical social worker. So talk to me about like just a little bit about your experience going through the schooling part and the certain things you had to do to get to earn that title.
So there's a lot of different paths you can take to become a therapist. The social work path. So like Max said, I was a teacher first. So I taught high school and middle school. And then through that experience, I think that was where I knew I wanted to go into something more clinical or one-on-one, because you're in a classroom of like 26 to 30 students who all have all these different needs, and you just feel like you can't.
I remember this.
Remember we had these conversations a bunch where it's like you just can't.
I can't save all these kids.
And not even like save. At 22 for sure, I was like savior complex.
Right.
Like I had to work through that big time. And so then I was like looking around, like what can I do? And there's a lot of
change. There you go.
Because as a teacher, and God bless teachers, like they're doing amazing work. But for me as a person, like that wasn't my wheelhouse, right? Like lots of people making a big impact in the classroom at a time. I work better one-on-one.
How many years were you a teacher?
3.
And then so
felt like 20.
It felt like forever. I mean, I loved it, but it was hard.
I've got a couple of friends who are teachers, and they're already worn out. My mom just retired, so I can. And I was in the education world for years, not as a teacher, so I definitely have an insight on that world. It is a thankless and payless job, right?
Sure.
One thing I want to know about you is, you mentioned that when you became a teacher and you had these group of kids, you realized pretty quickly that you were wanting to like really impact these kids' lives and help them. For you growing up, or maybe not even growing up, at what point in your life, or was there a point in your life where you realized, I want to help? And then can you talk about maybe where that desire came from maybe?
I mean, there's 2 different things that come to mind, right? So I can think vividly of, and this is like self-disclosure stuff, right? So in terms of experiential, like mental health stuff, I can remember vividly in like middle school, the first time that I felt like that overwhelming sense of dread that comes with clinical anxiety, right? And I had this like 6th grade science teacher who just like totally understood like that I couldn't do it that day, that I couldn't do it. I had to go home, whatever.
What a relief that would be, right? To have
Right,
someone who
for
understands.
sure. And because myself, I was like just overwhelmed and didn't understand. And so she's definitely someone who, like, that moment for me was pivotal, like having just a person who understood, who was, for whatever reason in her background, trained or had the experience to know what to do with me. And then when I became a teacher, so that obviously led me to thinking I wanted to be a teacher. But that was not what I wanted to. I mean, that wasn't like my calling, I guess, eventually. And then, but in my teaching experience, I also coached the debate team for my freshmen. And so with that, I got to have more of the one-on-one interaction that made me feel purposeful or made me feel connected to my students. And I had some students specifically who I'm still in touch with today. And this is, I mean, how many years ago was that? Like 12 years ago that I was a teacher.
Yeah.
Who still will talk about like those experiences on the debate team, whatever. So I guess realizing that I functioned better as a helping professional in those small interactions on the debate team was like, that for me was how I knew that I needed to be doing something outside of the classroom.
Well, and then also you forgot 8th grade.
Okay.
You met a kid that every time you saw him, you thought to yourself, holy fuck, somebody needs
Someone
to help this
this
motherfucker. What job is there that helps people like this fucking clown?
Oh my gosh, you're right. I totally forgot.
Yeah, you totally forgot. And then there's like,
That
this
was
guy
the
won't leave me
catalyst.
alone. Maybe I just need to take it upon myself, right?
Oh no.
I know very little about you at this point, but I do know that you mentioned you went to St. Joseph's High School.
Mm-hmm.
If you're from St. Louis, you know that in order to go to St. Joseph's High School, you have to either be really good at sports or have a certain degree of privilege in the world, right?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
It's a cost.
Absolutely.
It's a private school you pay. So, in your experience, maybe compared to others, you had a relatively stable life in this way, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yes.
But you still find yourself experiencing anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your experience of someone who comes from privilege and who has a lot of the basic necessities that are already there, which I think that you know that, like, especially kids who don't have basic necessities, it becomes very challenging to live, and it creates anxiety, it creates depression, and it feeds these things that we already may be prone to, right? Mental illness and things like that.
Right.
So for you, do you think that that people who come from privilege or people who don't like have a reason to feel anxiety or reason to be depressed, and I'm using air quotes for the podcast listeners because it's this illusion that we have to have reasons to feel this way even though it's a mental illness.
Yeah.
Do you think it's harder for people to identify that as a real thing when they already have basic needs and privileges and things like that? You see what I'm asking?
Well, it's the thing of like, if someone has everything that they need, then they feel more like hesitant to come forward and say like, oh, I need more. And what I need more is like, I need therapy. I need help with these like internal problems going on. I do think that. Are you asking if I see that as like a problem?
I'm just curious from your point of view. I feel like that when you shared that in middle school, when you went to your teacher, it was unique. I mean, in my mind, it was like a person who comes from this kind of life may be less inclined to be like, hey, I need help. Not because of just, so I'm asking, in your experience, do you think it was unique that you were able to identify it and like see it as something that needed to be addressed?
So I think, well, to be clear, I didn't see it as something that needed to be addressed till I was like in my mid-20s,
okay.
right? So that was still something that was just like, tough it out, like, you know, you've got everything you need. And I see what you're saying. I do think that's a problem. Privilege, of course, plays into like a lot of mental health, right? Like access to services, like chronic trauma of poverty and things like that. But I do think that mental health in a lot of ways is kind of this, like, there's a whole different world in there of like unseen stuff, right? So it's a risk we take of like, so I also work for a nonprofit, right? I have my private practice and then I work for a nonprofit and we go into schools and provide free therapy for students in schools. And what I see there is like,
we're not profiting.
What I see there is, a lot of the kids who like, have everything are hesitant to come and ask for help, or the teachers are less likely to identify them maybe as a kid who has a need that's mental health related, because they're like, oh, they're fine, they're well off. But like anxiety, depression, those things don't really care about your privilege. Like,
right. That's kind of the point I'm making, is that I think that in our culture and society, and we talk about it all the time, is that there's a stigma of mental health in general, and there's also like even like in different classes, it's like if you're poor and you're destitute and you don't have money, you're not eating meals and things like that, it's like, oh, of course they're going to be sad, of course this, that, and the other, but we still like don't address it. On the other hand, if you're well off and have privilege, it's like, oh, they're fine, they have money, they don't need it.
It's exactly what I was going to say was that I think it's important that we talk about how it goes both ways, where no matter where you're at, there's these kind of roadblocks that make sense, where if you are low income, if you are in any variation of a broken home, whatever it is, if you are a trauma survivor early on, then it's like, well, I should be feeling this way because like, oh, I'm not, it's not depression, it's not anxiety, or it's not this, or it's not that, because like I should be feeling this way because this stuff happened to me. Where then on the other end, it's like, I was a good example of that, where I blamed myself for everything and just thought that I was fucked, because I was like, look at my life. Why would anything be wrong? Like, why would anything be wrong inside of me? Because like my parents have given me I could literally do whatever the fuck I wanted, you know?
But that's, I think, and I get on you about this all the time, is that's the like should and shouldn't conversation, right? Like stop saying like I should or I shouldn't. Right. I just do. I am, or this is how I feel right now. And I think a big thing too is we have to be really cautious about like looking at what we see of like a person's like presentation life, like their performative life or what they put out to the world, and then assuming that we know anything about them based on that. Because trauma doesn't know any bounds. Like anyone could have experiential trauma from a very early age, like super privileged, not privileged at all, like does not matter. And then those things, you just carry them inside of you, and then that's what like boils up into the different mental health issues that people need support for.
And that's kind of what I was trying to get to in all of this, is like, and the point that you're making, and this is where hopefully this podcast and I'm sure there's other people out there trying to do it, like we need to realize that just what she said, it's like it's just like the stupid coronavirus. Like it doesn't see anything. It doesn't see race, age, male, female, young, old, whatever, rich, poor, and and when bringing it back to mental health, it's like this is a pervasive problem in our country and really in the world that is, for whatever reason, not addressed the way it should be. In your experience so far, I know that you're relatively new to the game. I mean, it's compared to other people, but like in your experience so far, why do you? This is a pure opinion from you. Like, why do you think it is such a undervalued and sort of ignored thing?
Mental health in general,
the value of mental health, and the issue of mental illness.
So I've been a therapist for 8 years now, and in that time, I mean, there's a lot of different things I see that like lead people to undervalue it. I guess I could talk about it in this way. So I have like the private practice world, which is my office in Maplewood, and then I have the nonprofit world, and you see two completely different sides of the coin in terms of how much people value the services provided, right? And on one side, it's like at the private practice, it's like not a question, right? These are people who are coming in who are saying like, here's my insurance, or I can afford to pay for this, and I want to be here. In the schools, I have kids who either want to be there or need it, but then there's still that like crazy stigma around it, of like, no, not my kid or not my family.
Question.
Yeah.
Are they, I don't know how to ask this without being, what's the socioeconomic description of these people? It's
a spread, right? Okay. So it's a county, like South County, St. Louis. And so the school I'm in, I'm in several schools, but one of the school I'm in the most is a very diverse student population. And you see it across the board, right? So I think and it's interesting there because it's a free service there, right? So it's like, why not? And so a lot of the conversations I'm having are with parents, and students too, that it's just, there's a fear around it. Like that means there's something wrong with me. And that's something that's indoctrinated, right? Like for the longest time, mental health, or like we come from the world of like, institutionalizing our mentally ill people.
Right.
And that's we're not that far removed from that. And we're not even fully removed from that. Like there's still some of that going on. It's not as bad as like back in the day when like husbands would send their
Lobotomies.
wives, or like
Yeah,
lobotomies
yeah.
or whatever.
Well, there's still prisons too now.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
prisons is
Oh,
a good way to
absolutely. I mean,
avoid
that's
that.
we could go down like several different
Of course,
rabbit
for
holes
sure.
on that topic, but for the sake of this, we're just not that far removed from a time when mental illness was like a leprosy, basically, and so still, there's this value, and today it's kind of morphed into this thing too, where there's two sides of it. I was gonna start talking about social media, but I don't know if I
Well,
should.
we can. No, we'll
get
definitely
into
get there.
that?
Yeah, actually,
Okay. I'll
think
save
I
my
can,
thoughts on
I was
that
gonna say
then.
I can take you to it because
Okay.
Danny and I are over here hyper thrilled because it's on this past episode.
Right.
Liz Beecroft said. Almost identically, you know, the difference in
Identical.
dynamics between between the two different sides of it, right? And,
Yeah.
what she said with the people who may not necessarily need it more, right? But the people who need it that are getting it provided for free, she spends much more of her time. And I know this to be true about you because it's what you talk to me about on a regular basis, that you spend most of your time just trying to get engagement.
Yes.
Just trying to get these open, whether it's a kid in a coloring book or, you know, it's not, they don't necessarily want to be there. And so then in an effort to get them to want to be there, you're playing more to their comforts, you're playing more to their strengths, you're playing more to get anything that you can out of them. Whereas with, you know, your paid clients, and I talked about this with Liz where I was like, it's got to be a really cool feeling. And I experience it with Brandon, not in a therapy role, but as like, you know, as a big bro. Brandon really wants to learn, and at 20, I thought I knew fucking everything, and Brandon comes in like hyper humble and wants to, like, I'll bring him around friends, and these guys will be like, "Is he okay? Like, what's wrong? Like, is he nervous?" And
He's
Brandon,
blushing over there.
Brandon will literally say, like, Brandon will literally say, "No, guys, I'm 20. I'm not here to chip in. I'm here to
Sure.
learn." You know, and that is like my micro version of, if I give him something to do, whether it's like, dude, you need to learn about Jay-Z's very first album. Go home and listen to it. He'll come back the next day and be like, yo, Jay-Z said this, and I'm like, damn, I just gave somebody some advice. They actually applied it and it actually worked. You know, and so like I was talking to Liz about how cool that has to be with paying clients who do value it as a service. Cause like I know that I can't really even afford to see Nikki the way that I do. But
Sure.
every time I'm in there, like it's like investing in your own education. Once
Yeah.
I started paying for my own education, you know.
Well, I want to clarify something too. Like, I didn't mean to say that the nonprofit kids don't value the service.
Oh, we didn't
right?
mean that. I didn't mean
Right,
that at
I
all.
was
but
gonna
we
wrap
meant
it up. I was
That's
generally
why I just want to
speaking.
clarify.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't think that's what you meant either. I just wanted to make sure it sounded clear because I think that it's still valued. It's just there's a big difference in
The difference is I'll tell you the difference. I was going to say this to kind of tie it together is that, yes, you're giving, in your example, you're giving Brandon this advice. But the bottom line is you can give him the advice all you want, the same way as you, but it's up to the person to take it. And that comes from their own desire. So like in your example, Brandon's lucky enough to have a guy like you who understands these things, sees these things that can help him. He has to want the help. So
For sure,
to your point, it's like these people who pay you to come, and I mean they're paying their money, which is like just an energy exchange, and they want help, and they will.
they're
right?
already at the place of like desire to change, desire to learn and grow.
And then it's hard as hell.
And even then it's really hard because then once you see what it actually takes to learn and grow and change, you're like, well, shit, am I really ready for this? And that's why there's a lot of start and stop in therapy too. And there should be no shame around that. And I talk with my clients about this all the time. I think it's a big barrier to entry. A lot of people don't want to start because then they feel like they have to like stay forever, or it's this like prescriptive amount of time. And like, at least for me and my style of therapy, that's not how I feel about it. Like, I do think it's okay to like take breaks when you are feeling stagnant or like
You're
just
good
can't
at
push
that,
further.
and you're good at that with yourself. I mean, you're good at that, not taking breaks. But I mean, like,
Oh, no,
you're-
yeah.
you know. But I mean, like, you're good at you call things in a gray space. You have helped me a ton in calling things black and white. Like, hey, it's okay. Hey, like, I mean, that's the bottom line. It's those two words from you almost all the time. It's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you are this right now, and
Acceptance.
it's okay. Yeah. As you mentioned social media earlier, and what Liz talked about with her version, and this is why Danny and I started this, was because there is this culture of mental health on social media that Liz referred to as pink, right? And she said there's all these. We talk about it as, okay, you shared the post, you didn't read it. You read the quote, you didn't read the book. You bought the book, you didn't read the book. You bought the book enough to say that you read it, but it always, no matter how far people take it, a lot of people don't take it to the work, and that led us into what self-care actually looks like and that sort of thing. And it was like a lot of people's versions of self-care, which at times you said, yeah, that's okay. You bought this and it made you feel good, but like Liz said, there's a whole culture of mental health, self-care that's entirely external, and it's encouraged by this like sharing and regurgitating of things that sound nice that people aren't really delving into or doing the work on. And I watch social media with you because I am obsessed with your New Leaf account, because while you did share a lot of things that you knew had been being shared by other people, where you took it to the next level was in your captions.
Sure.
But then I also watched social media, because of the way that it functions, I also watched it exhaust you and make you not want to do it anymore.
And then talk about being good at taking breaks. I haven't been on that account in like a year probably.
Well, I will say this. If you guys go to New Leaf STL, don't pay attention to the dates. So I think your last post was like 2019 or something.
I know. And it is part of the plan is
we're gonna get there.
Start doing that again.
And
You're supposed to help me with that.
I am going to help you with it, and I can't wait to help you with it. But if you guys go to New Leaf STL, there's so much good stuff on there. I found myself resharing most of the emo texts that I screenshot and black out the names.
Oh yeah, those are for me.
They're always with you.
They're
always with Kat, and then I see him get screenshot and reposted too. So yeah, talk a little bit about that.
So social media, yeah. So when I started my private practice, a big thing that across the board, like other therapists were saying, was like social media, it like matters. It matters a lot. And I was like, okay, it does. Like even my personal social media, I like can't care that much about because it exhausts me.
It is exhausting.
It's exhausting,
especially if you like really try to focus on it. I did it for a couple of months and it was like I'm done. I don't need to do this anymore.
And when you're trying to do it like, well, I was gonna say with authenticity, but I imagine it's exhausting to be fake about it too, because then you're like, trying to orchestrate this whole. Anyway, with the business account, when I started it, I like didn't know what I was doing other than just that like this is a good way to get traction or to get your name out there, because like therapy is still largely like the most referrals I get are word of mouth. And so then to have like social media is like a good way to advertise whatever. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it. So it kind of morphed through a lot of things the first couple of years, but I was spending more time on that than I was on anything else besides like face-to-face with clients. And I think that's why it ended up exhausting me, because I just couldn't get it to a place where where it felt as important as the work of like, I think once I had a bunch of clients in the office, I was like, this doesn't feel as important anymore. And then I was getting personally too caught up in like, oh, well, like nobody liked that post, or like nobody feels what I'm saying.
Well, and it was a really fun time for me because I felt like we were hanging out all day long because you were on it enough that I could like always be bothering you on it.
Right. And sending me stuff.
When I had to tell you things that like, I didn't have to tell you. When I told you things that are like sad truths, like Kat, don't follow more people than follow you, and that sort of stuff.
I still think about that conversation. I was like, what?
So upset. Like, wait, why?
Because I was following like so many people.
I'm like, you don't have to follow them back. There's no social contract that says, and that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing, and it's a sad thing. It's a sad reality that like there are people that will, regardless of the quality of your content or the authenticity of what you're putting out, if they look and see you follow 4,000 people and you have 800 followers, they're like, oh, then this person's desperate to get followers and they don't know what they're doing or whatever. And it's like this discredit. But like in reality, it could be like you could be an insanely articulate and well-spoken professional, and you just really want to follow everybody.
Other professionals.
Like that really could be the reality of it, But the reality of it then is that the way that people process that and internalize it, or not internalize it, but the way that people process that and like understand it now in like the socio-politics of social media is that, your page isn't as important.
Well, and I think the other thing to remember too, like for me at least, the like the return on investment emotionally for like social media is not that great for me. Like I'm putting in much more than I receive. And so that's why I think social media is just as nuanced as anything else. Like I think there's a lot of conversations around like, is social media good or bad? It's both, right? But I think what we need to be doing is like being honest with ourselves around like, how does it play in our lives? Is it hurtful for me? And so at the time it was, and there were times where it was really helpful to me and I had a lot of fun with it. And then as soon as I realized like, I'm not having fun with this anymore. And I also had like a lot of like chaos in my personal life at the time. And that was when I was like, okay, my energy needs to be going into like actual like growth and healing. And I'm still in that healing process.
You had to go to be about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask.
Talking about it to be about it.
So that's what I was going to ask you next is that, I think that the perception of a therapist by many people, myself included at times, is that these therapists know the answers to the world, that their life is very nice and organic and very calm and fountains and meditation music,
lunatics, man.
Which we all know is not right. So what I want you to talk about a little bit, if you can, is, I want to hear about the ability to do what you do and then also take care of yourself. And I want to, maybe if you can kind of like debunk the idea that like you've got it all figured out.
Oh, I would love to debunk that idea. I do not, right? And I think to me, I say be wary of anyone who tries to say they have it all figured out or who presents as someone who has it all figured out, because that's...
I know some people that that do that.
Oh gosh, careful. I'm
so happy I know you know who I'm talking
about. Tread lightly. Tread lightly. All right, continue.
Anyway, yes. So back to what I was saying. I do not by any means. And I say this to clients too. So, okay. Self-disclosure in therapy is this weird, like mucky area of like, how much do you share about your own life? And that's why even this morning we were talking, I'm like, how much self-disclosure, right? Like where can I cut it off? But I struggle with that because I feel like it's so important. This is, yes. and this ties in with the social media too, right? Like if we are only sharing this curated, like edited version of ourselves, then like that perpetuates the problem that we're talking about to begin with. Mm-hmm. People feeling like they're not enough, people feeling like they can't live up to, and of course there are other mental health issues besides just that, but a lot of what we see and why it's like, we say there's like an epidemic of mental health issues right now is because this comparative culture. And so for me as a professional to like come into like, hi, like, nice to meet you, new client. Like, I've got it all figured out and I'm going to like write down these solutions for you. Like, that's bullshit.
Yeah, it's off-putting.
Completely off-putting. Like, and it's also just not true. And if I'm not bringing my authentic self to the therapy room, then why would I expect my clients to do the same? And then what are we even doing there? So yeah, I think it's super important for therapists to acknowledge their own like areas for growth, I guess, and our own struggles. Cause Lord knows, like I've had plenty and like still do. Like I have to be, I don't know. Like when you said like Zen and meditation, I'm like, I suck at meditation. Like I keep trying and I like just don't like it.
Right. So all ties in so well with one of the things that made me feel really good about my relationship with social media that you said earlier was, is it worth the emotional investment, right?
Yeah.
Is it worth the emotional return? And like for me, and it ties right into what you're saying too. Like for me, it really, a lot of the time, and when it isn't, I get off. When it isn't, I'm gone for 3-6 months at a time,
Sure.
know, but it really is for me because I've gotten past I don't use all the hashtags. I don't use all the traffic engagement stuff on things as much as I used to. Now I just post for the people that are following. They're going to tell the right people that want to read, that want to hear it. But like at any given point in time, there is an opportunity in those DMs to have a really cool conversation, to have, and I've shared stuff anonymously with you, like probably more than I've shared with anybody else, like because I've asked for your direct guidance in being able to help people find their way, if they're local, find their way to you, find their way to somebody else. But as it pertains to myself on like my social media, well, I look at the sneakers and I have guys online that are like, yo, when I get to your level, bro, and I'm like, bro, I got one motherfucking rearview mirror on my 08 Toyota Avalon. Like I got 500 pairs of sneakers, yes. Bro, but like I'm in debt or whatever, whatever
Sure.
it is. And like, so I try to make sure that focus in, like, I have guys that I'm really close with Mark Sturridge, especially over in Manchester, UK, who like on a regular basis are like, bro, stop being so hard on yourself. And I'm like, I don't see it that way. I don't mean to be so hard on myself. I just really want to let everyone know, like, yo, I'm a fucking mess too. Like,
sure.
I'm a mess. This is not about, yo, I figured it out. Here it is. This is like, yo, I'm figuring it out. As I do, I want to make sure you guys know exactly where I was ahead of time. It was like the sobriety thing.
Yeah.
Like when I got sober, it wasn't like, hey, look at me. It wasn't the fake social media shit, or it wasn't intended to be the fake social media shit that was like, hey, look at me. I got sober. It was really like, holy shit, this worked. Like, y'all got to try this shit. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and now it's like, when I got diagnosed with type 2 bipolar and it all started to make sense that like, yo, why am I fucking depressed and want to die for 4 months when everything is going well? And then one day it just changes. And for 4 months, everything in my life is going shitty, but I'm happy as a fucking clam. Like and then when I got diagnosed with type 2, I was like, I got to talk to people about this shit. It wasn't like, yo, I got it all figured out now. Or yo, like, and I think that like that, you know, that disclosure thing, you know, right. That's like that's the crux of my social media essentially is like, yo, I want you guys to know that I'm about as big as a disaster as I could imagine being, but I am actively working to figure out solutions. And when I do figure out one, I'll make sure to let you guys know.
So to Mac's point, what you guys are basically talking about is the idea of being authentic to yourself in some form or another. Mac was lucky enough to have a platform where, you know, it seems like the what he's putting out there that's very authentic and real and pretty personal is getting a return that's helps validate and gets you through your process, right? But tying it back into therapy and more like I'm saying real life with air quotes again, real life stuff, not that social media isn't, because it unfortunately is.
It is now.
But what we're talking about is like allowing yourself to be authentic, right? And being authentic in and of itself is hard, and especially if you're trying to like become a better person. So for you, can you talk to me about on the therapeutic, like professional level, what you see when people do allow themselves to like look in the mirror, so to speak, and really do the work, and what the benefits are for that?
Yes. Let me think about that for a second.
The value of the self-work and the value of really being, it's hard for me to be who I am, and I'm like a white guy in the United States of America who's like from a middle-class family.
Like, should be so easy.
Right, but it's
should
like
be.
I've struggled a lot, right? So like, yeah, just the value of doing the work.
I think that looks, what I see with my clients is that looks different. I feel like I keep saying that in broken record. It looks different, but it does.
Well, it's important to mention that it's different for everyone.
It's so individual. And I know, I always think about, you wrote a post a long time ago about like terminal uniqueness, where it's
my
like
favorite term on earth.
Sure. And it's like where, remind me exactly what that means. So I'm going to butcher it.
Idea of
quickly.
terminally unique is that, oh yes, see, she knows how to reel me in just as much as he does. Terminally unique, the idea that you believe your set of problems and your set of conditions to be so unique that no solution will work for you.
Got it. Okay. So I think that's a super interesting thing, because I think that there's like a fine line there, because I think everyone's problems are unique, but not so unique that there's no solution for it. Right. So that's
it. In my opinion, if we're not evolving or trying to evolve to become a better person, it is a waste of time. I do, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect at it, because I have, just like Mac mentioned, I have like my ebbs and flows where like I just can't function. It's just like, but there's also times where I'm like, I got to do it, and I feel the energy. Yeah. So, and it's so important. I feel better. So again, talk about the value of the work.
I think that I think that to go to that too, there are times where like the amount that you're ready to face can be very different. And I don't think that we should like write off, because there might be times where it looks like you're not learning, growing, and changing, but like there's all these internal processes going on that are like getting you to we talk about like stages of change, right? So like pre-contemplative means you're like not even thinking about it yet. But even when you're pre-contemplative, there's still like things firing off in your brain or things happening in your daily interactions where you're like, well, fuck, like this doesn't sit quite right, or like something's got to give. But it's the sum of those parts that leads to like a desire to actually change or grow. And who's to say like what that part of the process looks like, right? Like we just don't know. And I do think like that taking that step to actually like looking in the mirror at the fullest version of yourself is very difficult for most people, like vulnerability, even alone, like to yourself. Like I talk about this with clients who are starting journaling. People are like, why is it so hard? No one's going to read this. It's like, well, you are. Like, we are our own biggest critics, like all the time. And so I think that's why it's so hard to do. But it's also like the most important thing, because if you continue to lie to yourself, like about what needs to happen or about who you are, then you're just going to stay stagnant.
Here's what I'm getting. Okay, so this is where I get really frustrated. It's like this, even throughout history, whether it's through religion or other things, like it seems like societies throughout time do a very good job of taking the individual away from themselves. So what I'm wondering is, like, it's so clear, crystal clear to me and to you guys probably, that like focusing on the self, as long as you're not harming yourself or others around you, is like essential and fundamental.
Super important.
And the fact that we have to, I mean, I'm glad we're doing this, but like the fact that we have to have a podcast to take away the veil or to destigmatize something that's clearly so fundamentally important. And like the answer, like I always say, it's like, and but it's like when I did some intense therapy earlier this year and I went through some stuff, it's like I came to this realization that it sounds so easy to say, but it's like I'm the answer to my problems.
Yeah.
Nobody else's.
Absolutely.
And the same is true for you, and Brandon.
Sure.
That's what, like, it's just so frustrating. It's like, why isn't our focus as a society on the individual?
I totally agree, and I think
Bit of a rant, sorry.
No, that's totally fine. But I think a lot of people come to that same sort of crossroads too, of like, I'm the problem and I'm the solution, right? It's all self-contained, and that's so fucking frustrating because we spend a lot of our time like waiting for someone to help us or save us. And yes, we need all that support. We need our support networks. We need advice at times, but like at the end of the day, it's you and you alone who's gonna like fix whatever's going on with you.
But for me, that was, in getting sober, when I learned and then became hooked on it, is the most empowering and cool thing that I hope that I find out. Like, I hope that I'm enlightened about more things as I move through my life.
Sure.
The way that I was whenever I felt the actual, like when I felt the high of delayed gratification that came from self-work. Like I couldn't, that was how I sold it in talks and stuff, you know?
But also, like, as much as you felt empowered by it, a lot of people feel terrified in that moment.
Sure.
And I'm sure you probably did too. It's like,
well, and you don't keep that, right? Because I think about the last 2 years. You talk about pre-contemplative, and this ties in back to like what basically where you kicked off. Because like the last 2 years, right now, everything technically right now at the, for the last 2-3 weeks with the podcast and how engaged we've been on it, that my career change, all this stuff, everything is going really great for me. The last 2 years or so, I was going through the stages of grief and not accepting anything and not sitting in my discomfort and trying to meddle and trying to make it work faster, because I was like, I've been enlightened about this before. I know that I'm the solution to all my problems. Why isn't any of this shit working? All right, I'll go see a therapist. Why won't I apply it? And then I've gotten so into that, and I've seen it work so well in the past that I didn't want it to take 2 years. Okay, now that it's taking 2 years, I'm like, oh, okay, it all makes sense. But now, last Monday, I didn't have anything bad to talk to Nikki about in therapy. And I'm already thinking, yesterday I was already thinking like, well, what shit do I need to unpack now with Nikki? Where Nikki is like, dude, calm the fuck down. Like if some good shit has happened, the same way you sit in your fucking discomfort and try to get through the bad shit, relax. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Like, take some time and revel in it. Enjoy it.
Absolutely.
You just got here. Where I'm like, well, no, I did the work and it worked. So now, like, where's the more work to do? Like, where's the next place to focus on that I'm fucking miserable? And it's like, are you miserable? Are you miserable right now, Mac?
I got a question on that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Like,
when my mom always says, since she's been a teacher for years and has a master's in some kind of social work therapy, I don't know, because she doesn't put it to use, but she's in this world and I'm pretty in tune with this world. And one thing she always says is that when I do go to therapy, she was like, now when it gets good, keep going. So, and that's kind of what you're saying. It's like you're at a point where it's going well and you're trying to like find bad shit to bring up or work through, when in reality, so from a professional standpoint,
let's talk about your childhood.
what's the value of sticking with therapy and continuing therapy when things are going well. Or and that's kind of also bleeds into like the value of therapy really for anyone all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do think we have to be cautious about, like, as people who like love mental health and embrace it, we also have to be cautious about thinking that therapy is like a blanket solution for everybody. Like, some people just aren't ever going to buy in or like it, and that's okay. For the people who do, though, I do think it's valuable to stick with it when things are good for a lot of reasons. One, because I think that when things are good, there's like this room for us to grow and change in places that we maybe haven't even identified yet. So I always say this to my therapist when I come in, and I'm like, well, like, all the like shit I've been working on for the past year and a half is like gone all of a sudden. I don't know what to talk about. And then you look around and like in your inner world, and there's all these other like tunnels you can like go down and explore that you just couldn't even see, because in crisis mode, your tunnel vision on this one problem.
Yeah, and you're so used to having been stuck
oh my God,
in your mind,
stuck in a pattern, or
why would I want to go back down there?
Like
right,
the
right.
In the trees, right?
Yes, exactly. And then you're like, oh, like here are all these other ways that I could improve, and it doesn't always even have to be about improvement. It can just be about getting to know yourself better. Like we talk about being your full authentic self. A lot of us don't even know like versions of ourselves that like live in here. And so when things are good and you can go in and have just this like intentional like hour that is set aside for yourself, which most of us don't do for ourselves, then you're gonna just start exploring, and you're gonna like learn like more and more.
Right.
And then in addition to that, I think it's also the obvious part of it. It's important to like maintain the rapport and the relationship. So then when shit does hit the fan again, as it will, because that's how life works, then you already have this established relationship.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. We're getting to the end here. I want two more things I want to know from you.
Like, think fucking God.
I could talk about this all day.
Two more things. One, overall, I know we've been kind of gone down some rabbit holes, and we overall for you, what does your choice and profession do for you in your life outside of it? Like what value does it bring for you personally?
I mean, there's a lot of routes I could go with answering that question, but
I get free therapy. So that's cool.
There you go.
Watch it. So for me, as someone who has struggled with like clinical anxiety and depression, like from a very young age, and tried like many different things, and like nothing ever worked, or felt like nothing worked. That's another thing. Like, things are working, right? You have to do the trial and error, which is all part of the process. So kind of getting to be like on the other side of that, and like just share space with people who maybe are feeling like nothing's gonna work, and knowing like if you stick with it, it will, and being able to like share parts of my experience, even if I'm not like verbalizing it, because it's their time. I'm not going to sit and tell my story in a therapy session, but being able to share like just the ability to share space with people, right? And then
it sounds like you're talking about human connection.
Yeah,
it's something I think is very fundamental that people undervalue, is that the value of connection. I think that when we connect with people, we can relate to each other, and we can relate to each other. That's when things get done. For
sure, absolutely. And as a therapist sitting in the room too, like I learn so much from my clients, like in every session, like. And that's why when you said, I think you said on an early one, like, oh, I'm an expert on mental health or whatever, I always like cringe at the term expert, because I don't feel like I'm the expert in the room when my client is in there. I'm like, you're the one who's in the driver's seat here. Like, we're going through your shit, and
love that.
And you're the expert on that.
And where we look to you guys as expert in formalized paths to help. Right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Formalized guides, expert guides.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with that being said, what are some, as a solution-based podcast, when we have people like you on, what are some ways people can find help if they're looking for help, or if they're looking for a way to start looking for help?
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the like silver linings of the social media world. I think access to help is so much easier now than it was like back when I was first starting to feel like I needed help. I feel like any way that you feel comfortable as a person. So if it's an account you love on Instagram that's posting things that like connect to you, message them. If it's, I don't know. I mean, Psychology Today, I feel like that's like the obvious one, but it is such a great resource. You just go on there and like type in like, what are you looking for? Where do you live, et cetera. And it'll connect you with like, a whole bunch of different therapists in your area.
If you're in St. Louis, where can people find you?
I have a practice in Maplewood. It's called New Leaf Counseling, and my website is newleafstl.com.
Perfect. Well, Kathleen, thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to let Matt close it out because that's what he does. We're doing some social media stuff there where he's a closer. But for real, thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah.
It's early on Sunday morning, so that was fun. Yeah, so if you guys, what's your Instagram? Do you want to give an Instagram account for people to reach out to you at, or are you good with what you did?
You give, it's
What's
New
my
Leaf.
Instagram?
It's New Leaf STL. Okay?
Thank you.
New Leaf
Or you
STL.
can give my personal one too. I use them interchangeably.
Kat Musca, KatMusca. She's like bikes and hikes and shit. She's all getting like, she does all sorts of cool shit that I wish I did. But we do really want to thank you, Kathleen, so much for coming on.
Of course.
I do want to drive home now that we've gotten you to your comfort zone. We definitely do want to have you back. Something that Kat and I talked about doing that I want to look forward to doing in the future is, we're going to get you guys engaged by giving you guys opportunities on the social media platforms to ask questions that you want us to talk about. I assume someone's going to ask for horror stories. We do want to spend a little more time on anecdotal stuff and hysterical horror stories if you guys want to hear them. But most importantly, Danny and I want this to be as important to you guys as it is to us. It's important to us because we need it. We know that it can be as important to you guys if you acknowledge that you do need it, or that someone that you love or care about does need it. And it's even more important to know that in St. Louis, in whatever city or town you're from, even if you live in the woods completely by yourself, if you have access to the internet, that there are real people, real cool people, real easy to talk to people, and real people that care, that are accessible literally everywhere, to have candid conversations like this, formalized, informal, in any way, shape, or form, and figure out your therapy style, figure out your communication style, figure out your learning style, and it can all be done as pain-free as possible. It's not to say that there won't be pain, but as pain-free as possible. So we really want to thank you, Kathleen. Danny, thank you. Big shout out to Brandon, as always, behind the lenses.
You really did well today.
Big love to all of you guys. We will see you next week.